Good afternoon and welcome to what is the first of a series of regional webinars focusing on the need for small-scale, affordable rural homes, starting with the New Forest. And the key here is small scale, more of which later. We hope the presentations we have from a landowner, a parish councillor, the New Forest District Council and National Park Authority, and one of our own residents will inspire you to find out more about what we do to help communities thrive. We'd encourage you to submit questions throughout the session, and you can do that by clicking on the icon, which has a question mark in a speech bubble, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end of the session. Without further ado, I'll now hand you over to Alison Thompson, our Deputy Development Director, who'll be guiding you through the webinar. So over to you, Alison.
Welcome to you all, and I hope you find today's seminar both informative and interesting. We'll be hearing from a range of speakers, as Dave said, and organisations who work together to bring affordable local needs housing projects to fruition. Firstly, I thought it might be a bit helpful for me to say a little bit about English Rural. We are a specialist housing association, only developing, owning and managing homes in small villages. We were formed in 1992 and currently have around 1,250 homes in 150 villages, which covers 40 local authority areas across the country. The average size of each development is around 6 to 8 homes. Our work is based on meaningful relationships with parish councils, local authorities, landowners, rural housing enablers, community land trusts, and neighbourhood plan groups. Each of our schemes is tailored to meet the housing need of that particular community, which will have been identified in a housing needs survey. All of our affordable homes are occupied by local people who have a connection to that village. None of our affordable homes have ever been lost to the open market. Our tenants do not have a right to buy, and our shared owners are unable to staircase and buy the whole property outright. This ensures that all of the homes remain in that community in perpetuity. Now, firstly, we're going to hear from a landowner in Kent who recently made land available for a small local needs housing development. I would mention that the video was recorded to COVID guidelines, in a field on a very blustery day, so the sound quality has been affected a little.
Yes, I'm Henry Bryant. I've been living here in the village all my life, which is nearly 73 years. My father lived in the village all his life, except when he was away at the war. And my grandparents lived in the village all their married life. So we've got connections with the village that go back at least 100 years, a little bit more. Well, I should think about 30 years ago, I was asked to make this piece of land available for rural housing, or for affordable housing. But I must admit I wasn't quite as philanthropic in my younger days. But more recently, the Parish Council did a survey which showed that there was a desperate need for affordable housing in Herne, and none of the other sites that they picked out, none of the landowners were prepared to sell the land, and I was the only one, which is fine by me. Having lived in the village all my life, I thought, well, here's a chance to put a little bit back into the community that I've lived in for so long. I would say that most of the problems really related to a lack of communication between the parish council at the time and the parishioners. Obviously, if you're going to sell land at a big discount from what it would make if it was for full planning permission, you're only going to get landowners to agree to that on sites that have no development potential, which immediately means that people think that we're building on the wrong sites, and they can't understand why it wasn't done on a brownfield site or somewhere nearer to other buildings. It was more of a greenfield site, and that did cause problems, it has to be said, but we overcame them, and I detect now that it's all signed and sealed, that people have accepted it, and I think once they're built, they'll be surprised how good they look. There was a development quite close to here at a village called Leveland, and there was terrific uproar there about it. And I've had several people from that area say to me, to tell you the truth, it looks better now than it did before. Well, mainly it's affordable housing for people of the parish. And in recent times, all the children of people who've lived in the village all their lives are having to move out of the village, possibly quite far away, when they really would much rather stay near their families. This has a big benefit on both ends of the life story. The grandparents are somewhere near at hand to help with the raising of children, and at the other end, the children are near to the grandparents to help them in their old age. And the thing makes complete sense to me that people don't want to move into the towns. They're country people, they want to stay in the country. And if you look up and down the roads around Herne Hill, I can remember when they were all occupied by people who worked on farms or in fairly rural industries within the parish. Now, of course, they're occupied by people who commute or work in local towns. I think the nub of the problem is that the parish councils have got to decide whether they need affordable housing in their parishes, and then they have got to communicate with the parishioners and tell them what they're planning to do, why they're planning to do it, and how they're planning to do it, before it all becomes sort of semi-official and parishioners are suddenly finding out about it at presentation meetings when they knew nothing about it at all, and all of a sudden the whole thing goes in the wrong direction. And it's all down to communication, as so often is the case in life. I have found English rural straightforward and easy to work with. I genuinely believe that they've done their utmost to bend to the wishes of the local community in their needs and wants. And I'm looking forward to seeing these houses built and seeing local people living in them and enjoying them and making part of their life.
Thank you, Henry. English Rural is always grateful to our local landowners in making land available. We also acquire sites from organisations such as church commissioners, local diocesans, parish councils, local authorities, to name a few. I'd now like to introduce Catherine Bonnet, the Housing Initiative Manager at New Forest District Council. Catherine will be talking about how the council can support rural communities to provide affordable homes for local people.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at today's webinar. Part of my role is to work with interested local communities to bring forward rural and community-led affordable housing where there has been shown to be a need. I will briefly speak today on the role of the District Council in supporting local communities that want to deliver new affordable housing. However, I'd like to start by looking at a couple of terms often applied to affordable housing development in rural areas, what they mean and the differences between them. The first of these is rural affordable housing. These are homes that are developed in rural areas. They can be for rent or low-cost home ownership. They must meet a defined local need and has already been mentioned, generally small scale. The other term is community-led housing. To be community-led housing, homes must be developed by the community for the benefit of the community. It can be geographically based, for example within a village, or thematically based, for example commoners housing. And the community plays a central role in the development, management and ongoing stewardship of the homes. Forms of community-led housing include homes developed by community land trusts, as already mentioned, cooperative housing or co-housing groups. There is a considerable crossover between rural affordable housing and community-led housing. So, for example, a community land trust scheme providing rural affordable housing within a village is both. I wanted to draw your attention to these terms as I shall be referring to the District Council's Community-Led Housing Fund later in this presentation, but wanted to make its relevance for rural affordable housing clear. So, how can the District Council support local communities? There are a number of ways in which the District Council can do this. Through enabling. There are many stages in the development of housing, and the process can appear daunting, complex and overwhelming. This is where the Council's enabling team can help, providing guidance and support to local communities through the various stages of the development process. This also includes links with wider local and regional affordable housing networks, providing the latest best practice as well as additional specialist housing support where needed. We also work closely with colleagues in the National Park and the respective planning teams through housing needs information. Identifying and understanding the nature of local affordable housing need is an essential starting point in the development of any rural affordable housing scheme. The Council already holds information on local housing needs through its own research and the Housing Needs Register, but we're keen to work with interested parishes and community-led housing groups to commission local affordable housing needs assessments where required. And where appropriate, financial support for these services is available to communities through the District Council's Community-Led Housing Fund. We can also help through delivery. The Council is committed to building new affordable homes for local people, and the Council's housing strategy has set out the target for the delivery of 600 new council homes over the next 6 years, including homes in rural areas. With an active development programme, the Council is well placed to act as a development partner in the delivery of new rural affordable housing. We understand that every scheme is different, and we will look to take a flexible approach to the delivery of rural and community-led housing and are supportive of innovative models of delivery to make development possible. For example, looking at long leases rather than freehold. And we are also committed to working with other delivery partners, such as English Rural. Through funding. As I mentioned, the District Council is fortunate in having its own community-led housing fund, aimed at supporting the development of community-led affordable housing across the New Forest area, including the National Park. Revenue funding of up to £50,000 per project is available to support the establishment and development of community-led housing groups and the development of housing schemes. Capital funding is also available to groups to support the construction of new affordable homes of up to £40,000 per unit to a maximum of £120,000 per project. A number of projects have already benefited from revenue funding, and we would welcome new applications to this fund. For more information on this fund is available on our website. And finally, through profile raising and myth busting. Rural areas face special difficulties when it comes to affordable housing, where there is lesser affordable housing available and there are greater problems of affordability. The Council understands the importance of rural affordable housing in helping to maintain vibrant and sustainable local communities and economies, and is committed to supporting new development where appropriate. Thank you.
Ali, you're on mute.
My apologies, someone had to do it. It had to be me first. Thank you, Catherine. I was just saying that it's essential that the support we get from local authorities, and it's great to see how much New Forest District Council is able to offer its rural communities in the way of advice and support. We'd now like to show a video from the chair of a parish council in Surrey, who's going to talk about their experience in providing local needs homes and the benefits that it's brought to their local community.
Well, we're standing here at the Miller Lane development, and the Parish Council have always recognised that a rural exception site is a good way to deliver affordable housing for local people who would otherwise be priced out of the villages they grew up in. We recognise that small-scale developments of affordable housing restricted to people from the parish can help invigorate the community. And Miller Lane had already been put forward by the owners, a family who'd originally run a market garden in the village adjacent to the site. So it kind of had a local connection already anyway. And so our initial step was to work with Surrey Rural Housing, the Rural Housing Enabler, on a housing needs survey, which established that there'd be sufficient people with a local connection to occupy the 8 dwellings that have been built here. The next step was to choose the housing association, and the choice to work with English Rural Housing was an easy one for us because they'd already successfully delivered 2 other projects in the village. We've always found them very easy to deal with, and they take residents' feedback seriously and genuinely work with the community to deliver the best outcome for the village. And importantly, they bring a local legitimacy to their projects, which is, of course, central to the whole affordable housing process. Okay, as a parish council, we're always trying to keep our residents informed so that they have the facts with which they can make meaningful decisions. And with regard to housing, that may mean sharing information on borough planning policies and targets, which may have an impact on the village. At the moment, this is very much in people's minds as we're currently in the process of engaging with the community as part of producing a neighbourhood plan. The advent of social media means that a lot of misinformation is easily circulated, so it's important that the parish council has a recognised set of channels that people can rely on to get their information. So number one, we have an official parish council website, which not only shows people meeting agendas and minutes, but also the latest news in relation to neighbourhood planning and other housing issues. We have a village e-news, which is an email system that people subscribe to, and emails are circulated to the village on a regular basis with latest news. And for those that don't have internet access, the postman is employed quite often for leaflet drops and general information to households. And of course, there's the local village shop, which is a source of much local chit-chat and can be good source of information, but a bit like social media can also be a source for misinformation, so we have to be a bit careful there. I think the website and the e-news channels provide the reassurance to residents that they're getting the information they need on subjects like rural exception sites and affordable homes, and they can be assured that in the case of affordable houses, they will be for local people. One of our councillors, in fact, represents the 5th generation of his family to live in Dunsfold, and the next 2 continue to live in the village thanks to English rural housing developments. Well, the average house price in Surrey is 14 times the average annual income in this country, and average rural homes are 30% more expensive than homes in urban areas. The result of that is that many rural villages have a real imbalance of social and economic mix. We wanted our community to remain vibrant and prevent the loss of local services and facilities. Therefore, it's important that our local community remains accessible to younger people and working families, and not just the retired and wealthy. Research by the English Rural Housing Association suggests that every pound spent in local affordable housing developments provides £6.50 in economic and social return to the community. So it's not just about providing housing, it also impacts on people's lives. And a good example here is the Dunsfold Village Shop, which is it's been community owned and run since 2011. And it was an English rural shared ownership property that enabled one of our young shop managers, who was really responsible for building the shop up to what it is now, to remain local. And she actually lived in Arnold Close, which is actually directly opposite the shop on the common in Dunsfold. Discounted local sale dwellings also provide an important kind of bridge, really, for those people who are looking for a larger sized property but can't quite afford the 3-4 bedroom houses that are available on the open market in the area. And they obviously also provide a valuable balance to the community.
Thank you, Stephen. That's fascinating and so interesting to hear. And I think one of the key messages that you were putting out there, how important it is to communicate with the local community, the plans that you're proposing. And I think the range of ways that you do that is excellent. There often is a lot of fear and concern about housing coming into a small village and the impact that might have and who's going to be living there. And so I think it's essential that the consultation process is a thorough one. Thank you for that. I'm now pleased to introduce Steve Avery, who's the Executive Director of Strategy and Planning at New Forest National Park Authority. And Steve is going to talk about the planning challenges facing the New Forest.
Well, thank you very much, Alison. I'm very grateful to English Rural for the opportunity to give you this afternoon a National Park Authority perspective on affordable housing in the New Forest. And the New Forest was designated as a national park back in 2005. It's one of the smallest national parks in the country, but at the same time, it's one of the most densely populated. And the provision of affordable housing, or perhaps the lack of it, is consistently raised as one of the biggest challenges facing New Forest communities. And this is really down to a combination of being a hugely desirable place to live and very strict controls on new housing in a protected landscape. And that means that we have some of the highest house prices of any national park in England, coming in at an average of around £600,000, which is something like 16 times average local earnings. And across England, it's been calculated that national parks produce a premium of 22% on house prices. So that's just really a sort of in a nutshell, a scale of the challenge that we're facing. And at the same time, there is increasing pressure on the existing housing stock for second homes and holiday lets. So all national parks are responsible for planning in their areas, and it's our role as the local planning authority to secure the provision of more affordable housing. And we do this principally through our local planning policies, and we do this in 3 ways. Firstly, we actually allocate now new housing sites, typically around 40 to 60 dwellings. We've got 4 or 5 of these on the edge of existing settlements, and the requirement there is that 50% of all the units provided must be affordable. And then we also get a number of windfill sites. So these are in our larger settlements. So these are sort of smaller scale housing schemes, private open market led schemes that come forward. And in those cases, for schemes of 3 or more dwellings, again, we will seek 50% requirement for affordable housing. And then, of course, we have a long-standing rural exception sites policy, and this is really what I'm just going to focus on in a moment. But I think it's worth making the point too that all new housing, whether it's affordable or not, is limited to 100 square metres in size now in the national park, as there is a lack of smaller dwellings across all the housing tenures. So let's just look very quickly then at rural exception sites, and it is perhaps disappointing, I think, from my perspective, that we've not seen more schemes come forward, given this long-standing support, policy support for rural exception sites. And I think that is because it is so hard, isn't it, to find the ideal site. I think ones close and on the edge of villages have hope value, and so landowners, I think, do tend to hold on to those in the expectation, hope that they may get planning permission at some date in the future for private housing. And so I think, you know, that does really behove planning officers like myself to be a little bit more flexible, I think, on locations if we are really going to deliver rural exception sites. And I recognise too that there are higher build and management costs in developing smaller rural exception sites. I think it's really great, though, that since English Rural, I think, have come onto the scene in the New Forest, there's certainly more of an appetite to unlock those sites and to bring those schemes forward. But that's really what we want to very much encourage as a National Park Authority. And that's really why we did that, to try to lead by example when an opportunity came up, when one of our own members gifted some land on the edge of a village to the National Park Authority to build some affordable housing itself, using developer contributions that we'd collected in lieu of on-site provision. And so this was a scheme that we built out in around 2014. It's in the middle picture there on the slide, and we worked very closely with the district council as the local housing authority, worked really closely with the parish council, and it was great when the planning application came in. There were no objections to it at all. The homes went to local families in the area, and one of the reasons why we did this is we wanted to try to then inspire other landowners to bring sites forward, and they have done, thankfully, and we're looking at doing a similar scheme now in Burley. My sort of sense is that communities are generally supportive of affordable housing, but as always, it seems to be the opponents of the schemes are the ones who are the most vocal and the loudest, and their voices sort of get disproportionately heard. And we've got a current application in one of our villages in the north of the national park, again for a pair of semi-detached houses like the ones we did at Bransgore. But there's some really strong opposition to that, and that scheme's going to struggle, I think, to get consent even with an officer recommendation. And so the other thing I just really wanted to end on is that you may be aware, but the government commissioned a review of all national parks in areas of outstanding natural beauty a couple of years or so ago. This was known as the Julian Glover report. And one of the recommendations in that report was that in protected landscapes like national parks and AONBs, that there should be a new National Landscapes Housing Association to build directly more affordable homes in these areas. And the government's due to publish its response to that report very shortly. So we're awaiting with interest that report. But yeah, I'm sure there's nothing new there. You will know all of this, but I just want to let you know that, you know, we're committed to playing our part in delivering small-scale rural exception sites. We have very good working relationships with the district council, good relationships with English Rural, and really do try to push this hard through our network of local parish councils. And so, you know, really welcome anybody getting in touch with us if they think they've got a site that's that could be built forward for a small rural exception scheme. So thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Steve. And it was so interesting to hear, you know, your leading by example and the sites that you've brought forward. I mean, you're quite right in your comments about the opposition to some of these projects, and that is absolutely right. And it is often disappointing that a small minority have the loudest voices. But I think, again, that's where it's key that all the partners involved in these projects do work together and ensure that, you know, many of the myths can be, you know, are dispelled. Finally, our last video, and maybe most importantly, is from an English rural resident who lives in Hampshire and who will talk about what it is meant to have an affordable home in her village.
I feel I was incredibly privileged to gain this English rural home, as previously my landlord had decided to sell our rented home. With high rural rents and everything, it meant leaving the village, which meant leaving our support network and my family and moving to a whole new way of life, which would have been totally alien to not only myself, but at that time, my 7-year-old daughter. The whole process with English Rural, from application to interview to signing the contract, was simple. It was self-explanatory, and I found the staff friendly and helpful. When we finally moved in, it felt like an amazing life opportunity. Immediately, I felt this huge sense of relief. We also have stability with English Rural because it means that we have that option of a house for life, which makes it feel permanent, which in turn makes it feel secure, and it makes it feel like a home. In this village, there's a huge sense of community. Being in this village means that I've been able to maintain that security for my daughter and myself. It also means that I have my mum and dad a stone's throw away, which is amazing. In terms of a village, it's a very friendly, tight-knit community. We have the village pub, we have a local shop, which is almost at the heart of the community. We have the post van, we've got buses, the village centre, where there's a whole host of activities. With the pandemic, I haven't once felt insecure, knowing that if I had financial troubles, English Rural would help, that I'm not going to lose my home, and that I can actually afford the rents that are in place due to them being a lot cheaper than private rents. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I feel very privileged and I feel incredibly blessed, and I am very grateful to English Rural. So yeah, very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great story. And I say we have many, many more like that. I'm now delighted to welcome our chair, Pam Reynolds, the chair of English Rural Board, who is also a board member of New Forest Villages Housing Association. Living in the New Forest, Pam knows firsthand of the acute need for more small developments of affordable housing in villages in the New Forest.
Thank you, Ali. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Reynolds, and I have the immense privilege of being the chair of English Rural Housing Association, as well as a board member of the New Forest Villages Housing Association. First of all, I would just like to thank today's presenters and to all of you who have made the time to log in to this event. New Forest Villages Housing Association joined the English Rural Group in 2019. This decision gave us increased access to skills that would help us use our own resources to build more affordable homes for local people within the New Forest district. Our residents include key workers such as firefighters, carers, paramedics and lifeboat crew, all vital to the well-being of the wider community. We currently own 47 houses across the villages of Brockenhurst, Burley, Bewley, Damerham, Minstead and Ashurst, but we have an ambition to provide more homes and the means to do so. To achieve this ambition, we need to work with you, forming local partnerships to help your community thrive. I sincerely believe that our offering is needed in the New Forest villages, where local people are priced out of the area. As Steve Avery said, the New Forest has the dubious privilege of having some of the highest house prices in the UK. I would like to sum up briefly about what we've heard today. The landowner Henry, who was so obviously delighted that he's able to put something back into his local community, and the parish councillor who so eloquently described the economic and social benefits of affordable housing in his village. Interestingly, both these gentlemen stressed the importance of communication between parish councils, landowners and villagers in connection with proposed developments at an early stage. And who was not moved by the testimony of Sharon, our resident, so very relieved and thankful that she has a stable home that she can afford and can bring up her daughter with the support of her family nearby. I'm sure you were also interested in Catherine's and Stephen's presentations. Catherine with the information about the community land trusts and the fund, and Steve, of course, supporting the development of rural exception sites. Now, I'm going to stop burbling on and crack on with questions because we've had a terrific number of questions. I'm going to read them out and pass them to the person I feel is best to give a good response. Now, if I have not read out your question, it's not because I haven't seen it, it's because some of them are repetitive, and so I'm just going to try and make sure we have a good across the board feeling. We've had several questions about what happens if parishioners do not want a development. And I wondered if I could ask Steve Hayward to perhaps respond on behalf of his parish council, because I'm sure not everybody in Dunsfold wanted the development, and I wonder how he dealt with objections. Steve, would you be able to comment on that, please?
Hi, yes. Good question. Strangely, I don't really recall too much objection to any of our 3 English rural developments. The latest one, I guess, maybe generated a bit more concern because it's a little bit away from the centre of the village and in a slightly more rural setting at the front of an agricultural field. But I think that now that people have seen the result, and realised that it's settled in, it's settled into the landscape very well. You don't really, you barely notice it actually, and the people that are living there, we've talked to, and they love it. So I think again, it's another example of people overreacting in the initial stages, but then once they actually see the finished thing built, their fears are kind of allayed. Accepting, of course, there will always be some objectors, but overall, I would say we've had a good response to our 3 developments.
Thank you, Stephen. The next question, we've had several again like this, so I'm going to ask Catherine, perhaps you should be kind enough to answer this one. At a 10th anniversary event for Hurrah, it was mentioned how difficult it is to get these developments through and that very few are built. I wonder if Catherine would have a comment on that.
Hi. Well, yes, I mean, there is no doubt that building affordable housing in rural areas, particularly in some, a national park, it is daunting. It's complex. But I think as presenters here, including Steve Avery, have demonstrated that it can be done, and it can be done really successfully. And a lot of that is down to the commitment of the local communities themselves. But yeah, it is doable, even though it's difficult, and that's where the likes of the District Council's enabling team, the other organisations and networks that we work with, as well as organisations like English Rural, can support local communities through that process.
Thank you, Catherine. And I've had a couple of questions about whether our houses are sustainable and whether they're eco-friendly. And I wondered if I could ask our Deputy Development Director, Ali, to deal with that point, please, Alison.
Yes, thank you. I mean, obviously, we want to build sustainable communities, and we want to build sustainable homes within those communities. We take a very much a theme of fabric first, which means that we look at designing and building the homes to the highest possible energy efficient standards, where villages don't have gas, we look at including a renewable source of energy, air source heat pumps to provide the heating and hot waters. We do look at other ecology systems, but I think the important thing is if we can make the buildings as airtight and energy efficient as possible, that will keep the bills down for our residents and ensure that the homes are affordable to live in, as well as lovely to look at.
Thank you. And this is a question, I think, which is best answered by Steve Avery, if he could. How can we, reviewing the white paper, planning for the future, can the National Park Authority consider fast-track planning applications that meet Parish Council design guides and carry local support, such as community land trusts?
Well, thanks, Pam. Yeah, that's a big question, and obviously
a big question.
We're still waiting the government's response on the consultation to those wider planning reforms. But at the heart of them, government was looking at faster routes to planning permission, and certainly if there is instances there where everyone is on the same alignment and everyone is supporting a scheme. You would hope then that some of the red tape and the regulation could be reduced a little bit to bring those schemes forward much quicker. But there's no specific proposals that I'm aware of on affordable housing. Of course, the planning white paper and subsequent amendments, are still making it quite hard to secure affordable housing as part of wider developments, and that's something we need to keep an eye on. We've struggled over the last 10 years, haven't we, with developers putting in viability schemes to show why it's not financially viable to provide a certain proportion of affordable housing on their schemes. And so I think, the planning white paper, the planning reforms, which the government will publish this year, will have something to say about housing delivery and affordable housing. And I think we just all await that with interest, Pam.
Thank you. And I've had a couple of questions about public transport links, which I know is a bit of a wide question, but I wondered if perhaps I could go back to Ali and just ask her whether public transport links to our development is something that we have to think about.
Yes, I mean, transport and viability is always a key point when we're developing. I mean, unfortunately, the majority of villages in the country don't have bus services on an hourly basis, and people who live in rural communities accept that they probably will need a car. And I think because we're actually building these homes for local people, the people who are living there already know that the difficulties of public transport. And I think because our schemes are small as well, they're not going to have a massive impact on increased traffic. These people are already living in the community. So it isn't that, the traffic surveys that we do demonstrate that there will be no additional transport problems in that community. But yes, local people will accept that, they will need to probably have their own transport. I mean, a lot of our residents do actually work locally as well, and having a home in their village has actually cut down some of the transport issues. So that's an added bonus.
Thank you. I think the next question, I've had a few about housing needs surveys. So I think perhaps if I could ask Catherine to answer this one as a representative from the New Forest District Council, although I appreciate Steve also is involved in this. Would New Forest District Council consider carrying out a rolling programme to complete a housing needs survey in every village, say within the next 5 years?
I'm not in a position to commit the district council to anything. What I would say is that housing needs surveys are part of or one piece of a body of evidence that builds up a picture of affordable housing need across the district and within communities. We are already looking to carry out housing needs surveys, and we will be continuing to do so. And as I say, it forms part of a kind of a body of evidence around housing needs.
Thank you. I think, has anybody else got another question? I've dealt with the ones that have come onto my screen. Has anybody else, is anyone in the middle of typing one? If not, I think I will actually bring this interesting question and answer session to an end, and just really end by saying, on a personal note, I was brought up in Brockenhurst. I went to Brockenhurst Primary School and Brockenhurst College in the 1960s. My kids went to Brockenhurst Primary School, Priestlands and Brockenhurst College. They've both been priced out of the area and live and work elsewhere. I've actually lived at Brockenhurst, Sway, Netley Marsh and now Everton. Most of my working life was spent in Lymington, so I do feel that I have the right as a local to talk on the subject of affordable housing. I was always brought up with the mantra that the New Forest is a working forest. To keep it that way, we do need to provide stable and affordable homes for those whose jobs and skills keep them in this unique area. I think that we can all agree that the need for such housing is irrefutable, but words are cheap and it's up to us collectively to make it happen on our watch. So let's all do our best, and I think the future generations may thank us for it. Thank you so much for listening and for joining this seminar today.